Thank you. Okay, welcome. My name is Karina Solmirano, and I am the ATT Monitor Coordinator, and I will be your host today. I will be moderating and taking your questions and concerns throughout this event. This is a very important week as we navigate a pandemic that has changed our lives in just a matter of months. We are all either home or working remotely or in just a few hours going to the office. It's been a very challenging year. And it's a year that we will remember for sure for all of us and our families and friends. And this is why we are very pleased that we are able to gather today on the third day of the 6th Conference of States Parties to the ATT. It is a great pleasure for us to continue with a tradition that we started 5 years ago of launching the annual report during the week of CSP. The ATT Monitor, the project that I coordinate, is an independent project of the organization Control Arms, and it is the only international monitoring mechanism for the Arms Trade Treaty at this moment. The project was launched in 2015 and serves as a trusted source of information on the implementation and compliance with the Arms Trade Treaty. Over the last 5 years, we have become, in a way, the treaty's only ongoing de facto compliance mechanism. We produce qualitative and quantitative research and analysis and try to explore emerging trends and practices that have an impact on the effectiveness of the ATT. The annual report, the one that we are presenting today, is our flagship publication. It takes stock of existing practices, it creates greater transparency in how the ATT is implemented. It informs the work of the Conference of States Parties and the intersessional meetings and ensures accountability in the treaty commitments. Our project is currently funded by the governments of Australia and the Netherlands, both of whom are present with us today. And we are very happy for this large attendance as well to this event. We know that many officials from different governments have joined today, friends and members of the academic and NGO community, colleagues from think tanks and research institutions. So before we start, I just want to remind you that because of the format of this webinar, you will be able to add or ask your questions throughout the event, and we will be then compiling them and making sure that our speakers can answer them. Also, if you're gonna use your social media channels, either Twitter or Facebook, we will ask you to use the hashtag #ArmsTreaty and the hashtag CSP6. That would help us to spread the findings of today's event. And without further delay, I would like to introduce you to our distinguished panelists this morning, who will, the first set of panelists will have about 7 minutes to provide some remarks for this event. It is a great pleasure for me personally to present Ambassador Federico Villegas, a connational of Argentina. Federico Villegas is the president of the 6th Conference of States Parties to the ATT, and he's also the permanent representative of the Argentine government to the UN and other international organizations in Geneva. Ambassador Sally Mansfield is the permanent representative of the Australian government to the UN and Conference on Disarmament in Geneva. And Ambassador Robert Gabriels, I hope that I got your last name well, is the permanent representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva and Disarmament Ambassador at Large. Thank you, Your Excellencies, for joining today. Ambassador Villegas, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Karina. Do you listen well? Everything is okay? Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really we know that disarmament issues cannot become a reality without the involvement of important organizations of civil society, the academia, and of course the role of member states. And so I think that I would like to personally, as president of the CSP6, thank Control Arms for the invitation to keep the tradition of presenting the report this week. You know, one of the big efforts we have done for this conference is to overcome the awkward situation that we are all living. And several institutions and organizations had different choices in order to identify how to move forward in the multilateral agenda during the pandemic. Some decided to just leave everything for next year, and they decided to cancel meetings. Very important organizations decided to cancel and postpone the high-level meetings for next year. Some others, like the Council of Human Rights or the Conference on Disarmament, decided to hold the meetings anyway in a different format. And so we had that choice at the ATT, and as member states, we found that it was very important to have a conference. Of course, with very special circumstances, which is a written procedure, we have to realize that it's a very different situation from the traditional multilateral conference, where this meeting will be taking place in a room full of people and being able to engage in negotiations and exchanging views on paragraphs and decisions, having sites events and becoming acquainted, etc. So that, unfortunately, this year, which is the essence of multilateralism and the way on the daily basis of any conference of this kind, was not possible. But we decided that it would be better to have a conference in this format than not to have it at all or postpone everything for next year. So having been said that, I would like to commend Control Arms, because we think that the types of reports that you make are the independent projects that we need as state parties and the entire ATT community, with for the possibility that reports like this gives us to get reliable information on the effective fulfillment by the state parties of the obligations established by the ATT. In this sense, this report constitutes a key tool for the ATT community, because through its studies and analysis, for instance, on the presentation of the annual reports by states, it contributes to enhance transparency in arms trade and facilitates confidence building. In this regard, I would like to highlight the preliminary analysis that the ATT Monitor makes about the ATT reports submitted in the last year, showing that the challenges raised by the COVID-19 pandemic may have affected some state parties' ability to submit their national reports on time. However, this preliminary analysis concludes also that the geographic diversity and varying levels of capacity for managing national transfer control systems of those who were able to submit reports by the deadline demonstrates that political will remains the greatest impediment to ATT reporting. In this sense, and as president of the 6th Conference of State Parties, I would like to take this opportunity to remind the state parties that have not yet submitted their initial and annual reports on the importance of complying with the obligation assumed under Article 13 of the treaty. Finally, I would like to highlight that despite the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic at a global level, which have generated delays and obstacles of different kinds for our governments and our societies, and have affected the economy at a global level, 2020 has been a very quite positive year for ATT in terms of universalization. And as you know, Argentina, in addition to be president of the conference, We co-chair also the Universalization group, and we are very satisfied that during our presidency, 6 new states have joined the ATT. And so we are very pleased to welcome the Maldives, Namibia, China, São Tomé and Príncipe, Afghanistan, and Niue. And that puts us member states in 110. And it's a record of ratification in such a short time since it was open to the signature. And within those states, we have a state like China, which has a very important percentage of the arms trade at large. So that means that we are getting important members strengthening the treaty and the possibility of this treaty to work. We are very pleased of these achievements, and I hope that in the aftermath of this event and after Friday, we will be able also to be pleased for the decisions taken by the conference this year. That of course, we will have to wait still 48 hours to talk about that because we are still under the conference. The last point I would like to make is that there is something that we always have to keep in mind whenever we talk about arms trade treaty and the work that we are doing, which is the constituency we have behind. I think sometimes when we engage in negotiations of specific issues, that some of them are very, very technical, as you know, arms trade, the world of arms trade and the world of arms control is very technical. But at the same time, we have a constituency behind and a goal of contributing to the maintenance of peace and international security. But also this specific treaty is the first international instrument that links arms trade regulation with international law of human rights and humanitarian law in a very important link in order not only to keep security and stability, but also to reduce human suffering. That's the big picture and the constituency behind of every endeavor that we do in moving forward the ATT community and the ATT agenda. So congratulations for the report, and thank you very much for keeping and deciding to keep your tradition of presenting the report regardless of the different circumstances of the conference. Because for us, it's very important to continue this cooperation with institutions like Control Arms and at least remind ourselves that we have to be creative in the way that we approach our agenda, and that's the way we did it today, and thank you very much. I will do my best to stay during the event and hopefully until the end. If not, I apologize, but I think I'll be able to stay if I arrange some minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Villegas. Thank you for taking the time to join us, and we're very happy that you received the report and that it's so well welcomed by you. It's very good for the spirit, especially in this very specific year in which was very difficult. But we managed to, of course, finish everything on time and have the possibility for all of you and all the stakeholders to be able to receive the report. Ambassador Sally Mansfield, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks very much indeed, Karina. And it's always lovely to be here with colleagues, and very happy to be part of launching the report today. It's something that Australia has been involved with since the very beginning. And since that time, which was perhaps an act of faith and an understanding of the necessity for it, you have continued to demonstrate the relevance of the ATT Monitor, driving a strong reputation for quality research and analysis And I think one thing that, you know, COVID has underlined for all of us is the importance of evidence-based decision-making. So I can only say that over time, the importance of this has really, I think, grown. It's also really important to us because of the way it represents such a significant NGO contribution in terms of promoting the understanding of the ATT. And in that way, it helps improve the transparency of the international arms trade. So we see it as an important source of information. Not only that, though, it really does bring together practical recommendations for government policy planning, for decision making. And I think that's incredibly important, that what the monitor does is help make the impact of the ATT feel more tangible. It tells the story, and I think that's really significant too, that the way we communicate what we're doing and the rationale for it and why it's a valuable investment certainly continues to be important. And this year, look, from an Australian government perspective, we were really pleased with the focus that you had placed on prioritising gender and gender-based violence. For our government, women, peace and security agenda is a really long-held and enduring priority. And it's not just because of the gendered impact of proliferation and the use of weapons in fragile and in conflict-affected settings, but also I think in terms of highlighting the diverse experiences of women and men in armed conflict. So that focus this year, I think, provides a really great foundation for the work to continue on beyond this year. I think it's also fair to say that it's widely acknowledged that women are disproportionately affected in armed conflict, as well as the sense that it's increasingly important to bring women into roles in terms of conflict prevention, resolution, negotiations, peace building. I think it was your 2019 monitor that reported on that and commented on what a complex and what a challenging task it is, and that there are many different approaches to the issues. So here again, I think that work is terrifically valuable as a way of sharing information between states, between NGOs, as a resource for academia and so on. And perhaps indeed this is a topic that you will revisit from time to time. You can measure progress and identify lessons learned. It's hard to go past this year without mentioning COVID-19, of course, because it's had such an enormous impact on all our lives, social, financial, economic, political. And I think some of that impact won't become apparent for some time to come. But again, understanding baseline information and tracking it over time is something that you do so well. It also, I think, allows us to see what's working, what's not working, and as ever, the interest in being efficient and being effective is paramount. So I think, again, the report helps us to do that. One area where there's some sort of work on harmonising transparency is the ATT report and the UN Register of Conventional Arms. And so it may be that in terms of further work, creating a format that works for both those fora could prevent duplication of effort and could even increase national compliance between ATT and the ROCA reporting. But one of the things that I think was mentioned very early on in this year's report is this question mark over political will. And what is it that prevents countries from signing up? Or indeed, your video highlighted the sense that this year was, 2019 was a bad year in terms of the numbers of reports that came in on time. That said, I think the monitor does tell a good story in showcasing the actual operation of the ATT. Which, as of course you know, is about establishing the highest possible common international standards to regulate and to improve the regulation of the international trade. So again, I point to your case studies of instances of diversion that featured in the ATT Monitor this year as a really valuable insight into the detection of problems as they arise and ways to mitigate those problems. I mentioned also the sort of importance of data, and so I think the way your report presents information is very accessible for the media. And so the role that this report can play in terms of providing valuable, accurate data to be drawn on is really important, because sadly, as we've seen this year, disinformation is rife. And so having a source where journalists, where writers, where academics, where government officials can fact check articles on the conventional arms trade before they're published has got to be a really valuable resource. So I do hope that by doing this, we can increase awareness of the value of the ATT Monitor. And in doing so, we can ensure that trust and better implementation are furthered. And that should be the case amongst all of us, government officials, NGOs, journalists, and so on. So fantastic work. Thank you very much indeed for launching it again. Thank you, colleagues, for participating. I encourage everyone to spread the word even further. Thanks, Karina.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Mansfield. Thank you. It's always nice to have those rewarding words and also your support to the project, that it's been really, very much appreciated throughout these years. Ambassador Gabriels, welcome.
Thank you very much, Karina, and thank you very much for organizing this event. As the others said, and good day to everybody. These are really extraordinary times, and despite the difficulties, it's good you organize this anyway with so many attendees from different angles. Before, I always participated in in-person meetings, and we saw everybody around the table, which of course is the preference we all have, also because you have informal meetings, you can talk to everybody, and that's a bit difficult like this. But this is the second best option, and I think this is for the time being the new normal, unfortunately. But first, I'd like to thank Control Arms for the invitation, and especially your role, Karina, in this, again, to participate in the launch event of the ATT Monitor 2020. The Netherlands, we are proud to be a long-time supporter of the ATT Monitor, which has proven invaluable in tracking the progress of the ATT implementation. It brings facts into the open, allowing us to have transparent and facts-based discussion, as also was highlighted by my previous speaker, my colleague from Australia. Transparency and the exchange of information are fundamental tools in the implementation of the ATT, as was also explicitly noted in the non-paper of the chair of the CSP on transparency and diversion. In that paper, the chair also recommends that the states expand cooperation with civil society, industry, academia, and other relevant non-state actors to enhance the implementation of the ATT, in particular on diversion. The ATT Monitor is a great example how civil society can and does contribute to a better working on the implementation of the treaty. Apart from being a topic of special interest this year, transparency has also been a major challenge. The global pandemic of COVID-19 has forced us all to quite literally step back and prevents us from meeting in person, which we just discussed. This is why this launch event is taking place not in a conference room. This has benefits. It allows more and other actors to join, as capacity is always limited when we meet in person. But it, however, also limits the frequency and the depth with which we can exchange ideas and information on the proper implementation of the ATT. And we should all feel responsible to find new and improved ways to continue our debate and allow all stakeholders in the ATT to take part. Regarding the conclusions and recommendations of the report, we are grateful as ever to Control Arms for highlighting areas where we can do better. You are rightly and literally reminding us to tick all the boxes where it comes to proper and complete reporting. And we saw the figures in your presentations, which in some way also a bit disappointing. You're also putting forward case studies, such as on diversion, and for us to tackle, discuss, and take lessons from. So with further ado, I'd like to hand over the screen and invite you to share the conclusions and recommendations of the monitor. Thank you very much, Karina.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gabriels, and thank you very much to the three of you for these remarks. Before turning to our next speakers, and because all of you mentioned, right, the challenges brought up by the COVID pandemic, but also the challenges brought up to many organizations working virtually these days. So this year we have been trying to also extend or enlarge our outreach to many people who in the past would have been able to travel or to attend a conference like CSP6. And so we have actually developed some new products on our website, which is actually working on a new platform. And because we believe it's important that state parties, but also stakeholders in general, have the opportunity to see how each state is fulfilling its obligations with the ATT, and they are made accountable, like you said, Ambassador Gabriel said, we need to remind the states parties of their obligations. So I'm gonna just briefly share a screen with you again to show you some of the new resources that all of you will be able to access in a very user-friendly way. I think it will give the opportunity for a lot of research in the future of comparative analysis for all people interested in doing and analyzing the ATT, but also for all of you members of the diplomatic community who have to go to your capitals perhaps, and sometimes, bring very quickly information that otherwise perhaps is not available anywhere else. So without further delay, let me just show you very quickly our new website. You will see that our new 2020 annual report is already online. I invite you to actually download the full report. We have also executive summaries in English, French, and Spanish for all of you to see. And, each chapter separated in a way that if you are interested in one very specific topic, you have also the opportunity to do it. I still invite you, of course, to read the full report. But sometimes we are in a rush and we need a little bit of information in a quicker manner. So that's why we also have these other resources. We have created, and I think this is a very important development, we have created an interactive map as well, where we pretty much include information on reporting and the reporting obligations of each state. So I'm just gonna, for instance, click on Australia, since the last speaker was Ambassador Gabriels, and you will see here the type of information that sometimes you need to have to understand whether that state is reporting fully, if it has presented its reports or not, and then to have a better sense of the type of analysis that the ATT Monitor does, and which one of my colleagues, Catherine, will discuss later today. You will see information that is very easy to compile, to understand, to read, to take with you to a meeting. This same information, of course, I'm going to do Argentina because it's my country and also the presidency of this year. And we have the same type of information. It's a one-pager, right? Very quick, very good to take with you. And of course, the same for the Netherlands. This information, although you will see that it says 2018, Catherine will tell you why this is the case, that the information is from that year, but it's because our data and analysis requires a lot of analysis, and it's not so easy to be updated to what's going on today, because the states are still submitting their reports for these years. And here you have a different way to access the same information. Hopefully in the future, for instance, we will be able, if you click on Argentina, to add as well for the future more information in terms of reporting, and also, of course, the previous years in which each of these countries reported the information. So I hope that you can take a look at our website and download this material, analyze, and get us your feedback as well, because the idea is, of course, as a monitor, to continue improving the research and analysis that we do. So I will leave that there for now, and I would like to now pass the floor to our speakers. It is a great pleasure to present Catherine Young. She's my friend and colleague, senior researcher from the ATT Monitor project, and Rachel Stoll, Vice President of the Stimson Center and Director of the Conventional Defense Program, another friend of the House. Each of you will have 15 minutes for your presentations. They will be presenting the main findings of the report, and then we will open, of course, to the Q&A session.
Excellent, thank you. Let me cue this up. All right. Great, so thank you, Karina, and thank you to all of our panelists so far for the very kind words about the report and the project. It's very much appreciated, as is your support. So as you've heard, reporting by ATT states parties is really a vital component in fulfilling the purpose of the ATT to promote transparency. So ATT Monitor annual reports each year seek to provide information in support of this purpose. So as disappointing as it is that we can't hand you a copy of the report this year, we're very happy to make all of these resources available online. And thank you, Karina, for walking everyone through the country profiles and the interactive map. And I'll talk a little bit more about the analysis that we've put into those resources as part of our annual report this year. So please do visit our website, read the report, take a look at the summaries. And just before I jump in, I do want to give a quick thank you to everyone who made this report possible this year. So the report wouldn't be possible without our donors, of course, but also our experienced and knowledgeable expert contributors like Rachel from around the world. And especially during this challenging year, we've been fortunate to have a dedicated team, including our editorial team, our partners, our reviewers, and everyone else who made this report a reality. It's really quite a team effort. So today I'll be walking you through the report and highlighting key findings along the way. And as you can see, the report is divided into 4 main sections, and those familiar with the report will see it looks similar to last year. So the first chapter is the year in review, which gives a snapshot of where the treaty stands regarding universalization, reporting and compliance, and CSP systems and procedures. And chapter 1 is our special section, which is our thematic chapter in each edition, which last year was GBV. This year, given the Argentinian president's priority theme for the conference, the special section looks at the role of transparency and information sharing in tackling diversion. Then the remainder of the report focuses on reporting obligations and transparency commitments. So chapter 2 is a detailed analysis of 2018 ATT Annual Reports. And these detail imports and exports from the 2018 calendar year, and were due on 31 May 2019. And as Karina mentioned, we look in depth at these reports from the previous year to make sure we have enough time to do the detailed analysis we need to in order to get as much information from them as possible. And then chapter 3 includes a preliminary look at 2019 annual reports. And these detail imports and exports from the 2019 calendar year, and were due on 31 May this year. And Chapter 3 also looks at ATT initial reports up to our cutoff for analysis in June 2020 for the ATT Monitor report. And Rachel is going to go through the findings of Chapter 3 after I finish the remainder of the report. So I'm going to start a bit out of order and turn to diversion first before we jump into reporting. And in a side event on Monday with Rachel and others, we heard about the importance of strengthening a shared understanding of the impact of the ATT in addressing diversion. And that's what this chapter seeks to do in helping to fill gaps in understandings around the key terminology and treaty provisions related specifically to transparency, information sharing, and diversion. So first, we take an in-depth look at these provisions, some of which you can see here. And these are explicit references to both transparency and information sharing in the ATT. However, this chapter does note that the ATT as a whole provides a pretty broad framework for promoting cooperation between states parties, as well as information sharing, transparency, and responsible action by states in the global arms trade. So ultimately, this chapter illustrates the need for greater transparency and increased cooperative action among all ATT stakeholders to both prevent and mitigate diversion. Because all stakeholders have a role to play to help fully implement these treaty provisions. So in addition to taking a look at treaty provisions mentioned previously, this chapter looks also at cooperation and mutual assistance under the ATT. It gives specific diversion prevention and mitigation measures, and it gives 3 examples of actual cases of diversion, which have already been highlighted. But if we had another hour, I could share with you more concrete details of information included in this chapter, including the recommendations we make for effective cooperative action to tackle diversion at each stage in the transfer chain. It's really a comprehensive chapter, but unfortunately, time is limited. So please do take a look at the report for more information on this. And the remainder of my time will be mostly spent on identifying our key findings of analysis of 2018 annual reports. But before jumping into that, I want to highlight a few points included in our year in review chapter. I'd like to highlight universalization specifically because it had been, at the time of analysis for the ATT Monitor, at the time the cutoff date for analysis concluded, it was a relatively slow year for universalization, but that has changed since then. So we're happy to see that in addition to the 4 countries that became states parties between this year's report and last year's report, and those were Botswana, Canada, the Maldives, and Namibia, we are now joined by China, Sao Tome and Principe, Afghanistan, and Niue. So their participation will be captured in next year's ATT Monitor report. So the year in review also captures the highlights of our analysis of ATT reporting, which includes 2018 and 2019 annual reports and the initial reports that were submitted up to June 2020. So we see that there is a group of states parties that have demonstrated commitments to transparency pretty consistently, and I'll talk about good practice here a bit later. But I do want to highlight that we see an increasing number of states parties keeping initial and annual reports confidential. And this is a worrying trend, one we see from 2018 reports, and Rachel will talk about this in the context of 2019 reports and initial reports. So given the particular challenges of this year, we will look at these trends in a non-COVID year, but at this stage, it seems to be clear that these are trends that are emerging. So moving on to chapter 2, and this chapter covers a lot of ground. It's our in-depth analysis of 2018 annual reports. And again, these detail imports and exports from the 2018 calendar year, included in reports due on May 31st, 2019. So we look at the quantity of reports submitted and states parties' compliance with reporting obligations, and then we take a closer look at the quality of what states reported. And overall, as you can see from the intro video, progress seems to be slow. So at the time of analysis, 61 of 92 states parties that were due to submit 2018 annual reports did so. which is a compliance rate of 66%. And there were actually 62 reports that were submitted, including one by Chile, who submitted a report even though it was not yet obliged to do so. So this compliance rate is just 1% higher than the compliance rate for 2017 annual report. So there is a slight improvement there. However, only 51 states parties, or 55%, made their reports publicly available, and this speaks to the trend we've identified towards increased confidential reporting. And Rachel will have more information on this for 2019 annual reports, but to illustrate this trend, I want to point out that from 2015 to 2018, the reporting years, the share of total reports due that were kept confidential increased from 2% to 11%, with the largest increase occurring between 2017 to 2018 reports. So we also found that 27 states parties submitted neither a 2017 nor a 2018 annual report. And when 2019 reports are included in this analysis, the number doesn't change much. And Rachel, I believe, will touch on that, but if not, you can read about this in Chapter 3 in the ATT Monitor report. And the table presented here shows that the majority of these states are in Africa and the Americas, mostly the subregions of Western Africa and the Caribbean specifically, which are regions we've identified that may benefit from additional reporting assistance. And then in looking at the quality of annual reports, we found that only 39% of states parties due to submit reports submitted ones that contain the minimum necessary information for us to meaningfully assess the reported transfers. For the rest, it's either difficult or impossible to assess these transfers and to determine whether or not states parties who submitted these reports or did not are meeting their treaty obligations. And I want to note that this year we did not undertake the extensive exercise of comparing exports and imports. And we thought instead it would be useful to show, and we do this in Chapter 2.3, the real vast variation in reporting practice that helps contribute to the discrepancies in reported exports and imports we included in previous editions of the ATT Monitor. We did, however, take a close look at reported imports this year, as we can see in 2018 annual reports that a number of states parties reported no or little information on their imports, though other states parties reported exports to them. So I encourage you to take a look at the ATT Monitor report for many examples of these that we give. And we highlight these in part because reporting on imports can be a vital component of efforts to identify diversion, for example, as well as other elements of national control systems that may be improved. So the good news is that examples of good practice are emerging, and notably when states parties provide more than the bare minimum information in their annual reports. So this, for 2018 annual reports, 31 states parties provided descriptions of all or many of their reported exports and imports. 15 states parties used the ATT reporting template to report exports and imports of shotguns specifically, and 10 states parties definitively stated that no conventional arms of specific categories had been exported or imported by writing nil or 0 or a dash or anything, rather than leaving the space blank in the template or reporting tool that makes clear that there were actually no transfers reported. All of these practices contribute to helping us paint a more complete picture of the global arms trade. So Chapter 2 also includes our country profile analysis, which we're happy to provide each year. The 52 publicly available 2018 annual reports form the basis of analysis, as in previous years, and each profile provides data on key reporting practice metrics, as well as a summary of areas of good practice and areas for improvement. And the profiles also contain a summary of transfers reported by each state party. It includes basic comparable information, such as import and export partners, and overall numbers of weapons categories and subcategories. And I won't highlight much detail of the country profiles, as they're really dense, but useful to have this information disaggregated on a country-specific basis. And as Karina showed you, we're very happy this year to have made the country profiles available on our website, in addition to being tucked inside the ATT Monitor report each year, so they're more accessible and easier to find. And moving on, finally, we have Chapter 2.3. While the country profiles provide analysis of reporting practices disaggregated by country, and this allows us to, to look at the reports and do a comparative year-to-year analysis. The tables presented in 2.3 seek to provide information presented by states parties in a manner that allows for better comparison across annual reports. So by providing easily accessible and comparable information about reporting practice, it becomes easier to untangle the many different kinds of information provided by states and provide more context and understanding of global arms transfers in the process. Because as we know, it matters whether states report authorized or actual exports and imports, as do definitions of key terminology and categorizations of conventional arms. So each year, states parties present new or different kinds of information, and to get a good picture of the global arms trade, analysis of each report must take stock of reporting practice in order to allow that picture to emerge. So we appreciate the work of the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting and the ATT Secretariat to support and encourage this process, including discussion this year on amending the reporting templates to make it easier for states to provide relevant and comparable information. And then Chapter 3 looks at what we can learn from this year's round of reports. And I will kindly look to Rachel now to take us through those findings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Rachel, welcome.
Thank you. I'm just getting my screen here so we can share this. Hopefully this is working. There we go. Hopefully you can see me. Thank you, Karina and Catherine, and thank you to Control Arms and the ATT Monitor for sticking with this annual event. I'm very appreciative to be part of it yet again, and to be alongside the distinguished ambassadors who have lended their support to this process. We know that transparency in arms transfers is really a central component of the ATT, and it's really fundamental to achieving the treaty's goals and objectives. So I'm appreciative of the support for this project and for the attention given to the discussion of transparency and reporting. So as Catherine said, I'm going to focus my remarks today on what we know so far about the report submitted in 2019, as well as offer some insights into some challenges and good practice. So I want to start with the chapter on the initial reports on ATT implementation, because they really do continue to serve as a key tool for monitoring ATT implementation and understanding how states interpret and incorporate the treaty into their national control systems. So as Catherine said, we finalized our chapters in June, and so obviously there's new data to include there. So when we finished and finalized the monitor chapter, 100 of the 106 then states parties were required to submit their their initial reports to the ATT Secretariat. Since we published and before today, there were 2 additional states parties that have had their reports come due as well. So there's now 102 that are due at this time. So far, 76 states parties have done so, which is out of 102. That's a compliance rate of 75%. So we're looking forward to seeing some of the new states parties that were just mentioned completing their initial reports on time, so that we can discuss them next year. Since we completed last year's, the 2019 monitor, there were 6 states parties that were due to submit their initial reports. And of these 6, 2 did so and submitted their reports to the Secretariat. An additional 4 states also belatedly submitted their initial reports to the ATT states party. So even if you haven't yet submitted your report and your deadline has come and gone, it's still possible and welcome to submit your initial report, even if it's a bit late. And so we're hoping that the resurgence of those reporting trends may serve as a positive early indicator towards reporting compliance. And so we encourage all those 25 other states that are still needing to submit their reports to do so. So we had an opportunity to do analysis of 6 new initial reports this year. Unfortunately, 2 of those 6 did elect to keep their reports private on the ATT Secretariat's website, so we could not review their implementation practices or compare their national control systems with other states parties, or even assess potential areas of strength or weaknesses to identify opportunities for support or cooperation. So it's really important that those initial reports are made public so that all of the benefits of the initial reports can be fully realized. And I do want to point out, it was on the video that Karina showed at the beginning, that 14 states parties have chosen to make their initial reports private. And that's an unfortunate increasing trend. If we look back at the monitor in May of 2016, only 4% of submitted initial reports were private, but that percentage has only increased over time, and we now have 18% of all initial reports that are submitted are kept private, and that's worrying. I also want to point out that Article 13.1 requires states to update their initial reports when they take any new measures to implement the treaty. To date, only 4 states have submitted updates to their initial report, despite the fact that we know through anecdotal evidence, through other reporting, through presentations that states have given at CSP and working group meetings, that they have taken additional measures to implement the ATT. Now, part of this may be that there is no clear process or mechanism to be able to submit that report. But since the publication of the 2019 monitor, when we first raised this issue, the working group on transparency and reporting has continued its efforts to help states better understand and comply with their reporting obligations. So I'm hoping that next year we'll have more than those 4 who have submitted their updates to their initial reports. I want to turn now to the annual reports, because I think it was very clearly stated in the opening remarks from Ambassador Mansfield and also from Karina that the annual reports on arms exports and imports serve a variety of purposes to better understanding the global arms trade. They also help us facilitate confidence building, provide some responsibility and accountability in national arms transfer decisions. And it really, when you look at the data in the annual reports, it allows you to understand how states are applying the export assessment criteria and specific transfer decisions to the ATT. It also, when we look at these annual reports, we're able to identify some good practice in record keeping, and we can also detect issues with data collection and collation processes that might be helpful not only for the state involved, but for other states parties as well. So again, I'm going to try not, there's lots of numbers in the actual ATT monitor, and I know it's difficult, particularly in a Zoom chat, to follow all the numbers. So, but I do want to give you some big ones, and then I'll try and pull back a little bit. You all know how much I love arms trade data. But we had 97 states parties that were required to submit their 2019 annual reports by the 31 May deadline. And you may remember that the ATT Secretariat grants a 7-day grace period to states to submit their reports. But by the time of our finalization of the report in June, only 35 of the 97 states parties that were required to submit their annual reports had done so. And then Maldives, which was not required, so yay Maldives, also submitted an annual report. So we had 36 to actually examine at the time of the ATT's monitor's finalization. So that is, of course, the lowest on-time completion rate we have seen since the treaty reporting requirements went into effect. If you compare that to last year, and it was on the video that Karina showed, the on-time rate for annual reports last year was 49%. Now, I think we all recognize that COVID has played a tremendous impact. And so I'm hoping that this year is really just an outlier due to the challenges that governments faced with having people work remotely and not having access to data and not having some processes in place to be able to put those reports forward, as well as the prioritization of reporting, given all the other challenges that states are dealing with. I hope that's the case and it's an outlier, but I don't want us to become complacent and think that when there's lots going on, ATT reporting can be pushed aside. So I think that's really important. I would like to say that since the monitor went to print, an additional 14 states parties have submitted their report. So the current number is 50, which is a compliance rate of 52%, which is better, so yay. But when I presented last year at this time, at this very same event, there was a 58% compliance rate. So we're still below where we were last year. And so I think, again, it's just important to be vigilant. I do want to give a little bit of detail about some of the things that concerned me, even with all of the caveats about this being a COVID year. When we looked at the states parties that had submitted by June, 6 states parties had elected to keep their 2019 reports private, which is 17% of the on-time reports submitted. And since in the last 2 months, the states parties that have submitted their reports, another 4 of those 14 that I mentioned have been kept private. So that means 10 of the 50 thus far have been kept private, which is 20% of all submitted reports. So again, that's a bit worrying. If you look at last year's, it was only 13% that had been kept private by the time I was giving this presentation last year. So it's a concerning trend. It's also concerning because it's not just new states parties which are choosing to keep their reports private. It's parties that previously had made their reports public. Now those reports are being made private, and that is also a worrying trend. So if you look at the fact that we have more states parties than we have before, we had 5 states parties were required to submit an annual report for the first time. 2 of those states parties did meet the reporting deadline. One of those is Chile, who I think Karina or Catherine had mentioned submitted their report last year, even though they weren't required to do so yet. So Chile is on the right track for continuing their on-time reporting. And I should say that since we finalized the monitor chapter, Kazakhstan has also submitted its report, and it was due for the first time. Catherine mentioned that there are numerous states parties that have never completed their annual reports, even though they've been required to do so. So not counting the new reporters this year, because I'm still hopeful that they'll report by the end of the year, there are 26 countries that have repeatedly not met their reporting obligations. On the plus side, there are 31 states parties who have submitted a report every single year that they have been required to do so. So that is great news, and that's great progress. And I hope that next year I'll be able to say that number is even bigger. I also want to point out that, interestingly, there's no requirement in Article 13.3, like there is in 13.1, to update annual reports. But there are 2 states parties that have updated their reports to provide new data or correct something that had been reported before. And I think that's really good practice for states to provide clarifications and corrections for new or more accurate information as it becomes available, so that these reports really can be as useful as we hope. As I mentioned, there's a lot of data in the monitor itself, and so I don't want to go into too much detail here, but just a few interesting notes that we found of the 30 publicly available 2019 reports that were available before we finalized the monitor text. So 10 states parties submitted reports using the online reporting tool. This is only the second year that the online template was available for you. So it's good that states are actually beginning to utilize that. There were states parties that indicated that they submitted nil reports for arms exports and imports. And a nil report is still an important piece of information to provide. So we very much want to encourage states who feel they don't need to report because they have nothing to report to complete those nil reports. That is a useful data point as well. We talked about some of the worrying trends. One of those is the fact that 7 states parties noted that they withheld commercially sensitive or national security related data. And that's about 20% of reporting to states parties. And that's, again, a concerning trend when you see data withheld from those reports. 5 states parties indicated they included some information on national definitions and categories of conventional arms, which is helpful. That's lower than last year, but again, hoping that this year was a little bit of an outlier in that states were rushing through and not providing as comprehensive information. So as Catherine just mentioned in her remarks about the importance of providing full and complete information, explaining why there's a blank space, for example, that's really helpful for us as we do that analysis. There are, as we're thinking about reporting compliance and the engagement of key stakeholders, it's important to really think about how we can improve ATT reporting processes and practices. We have sort of this, I'm going to call it a bonus year instead of a lost year, a bonus year to really focus on some reporting issues. Since the publication of the 2019 monitor, the working group on transparency and reporting co-chairs have collected comments and suggestions for possible amendments to the reporting templates from the working group meetings in January and April of 2019. And so these comments and suggestions have been compiled into an annex for CSP5 saying these are the kinds of things we want to talk about. And the working group took up as part of its mandate an effort to amend those reporting templates. And I think that's really important because we've identified some serious challenges with the templates in terms of providing comprehensive information. There were conversations in January of this year. If you can think back, we all did meet in January, seems so long ago, to talk about reporting template changes during the intersessional period in advance of CSP6. And if you look, which I'm sure you've all read very diligently, the working group on transparency and reporting's report for CSP6, you'll see in the annexes, there are the suggestions that states had made to the reporting templates. So while the discussions on the reporting templates have been delayed a little bit, I do hope they will be completed in time for the CSP7 cycle, since so much substantive work has already been put into providing suggestions, and it'll allow us next year to really adopt new reporting templates that will provide us more comprehensive information. There are many other initiatives that the working group on transparency and reporting have suggested to review the status of reporting and to monitor and assess the use of the online reporting tool and the information exchange platform on the Secretariat's website, as well as an opportunity to discuss other reporting challenges. And I just, a bit selfishly, but also because I think it's important to the functioning and effective implementation of the ATT, I really would encourage all of that information sharing and all of those discussions to be done in a public and transparent way that includes all stakeholders who have experience in these areas. So in other words, these discussions should be public. They should include insights and best practice that's been developed by civil society and states alike. If they're on sort of the restricted area of the website, we really miss an opportunity to have a rich and comprehensive discussion. And I'll get off my soapbox about that now. We've noticed that there have been significant obstacles to reporting. Each year we have these discussions. I'm missing the Secretariat's wonderful presentation on reporting that they do each year, but we know that there are obstacles to reporting, and I think they've been exacerbated this year due to COVID. And so anytime we have limited resources and technical and resource capacities, they're going to be exacerbated in a pandemic when people are working remotely, as well as difficulty accessing and compiling relevant information, difficulty in maintaining awareness of reporting obligations and deadlines. Again, the prioritization of reporting to the ATT during a global pandemic is probably low, and we want to make sure that this is part of the regular annual process for governments. So I do want to sort of end by reminding all of us that transparency really is at the core of the ATT. If we look at Article 1, it says promoting cooperation, transparency, and responsible action by states party in the international trade in conventional arms, thereby building confidence among states parties. That's an object and purpose of the treaty. It is not an afterthought. It is not just for a side event, really. It is the core of the treaty's purpose. So after many years of speaking to you on this subject, I think it's clear there are benefits of ATT reporting, and Ambassador Mansfield laid some of those out at the beginning, and we're seeing some of that good practice, as Catherine mentioned, starting to bear out from the ATT initial and annual reports. It would be a real shame, in my view, if strides that we've made on reporting in the last 5 years are derailed because of COVID. And so I really encourage all of us to remain vigilant in our support of state efforts to fulfill their reporting obligations. And I can provide my personal commitment to assist those who are interested in those pursuits. And if we see states parties continue to provide more rather than less information in their ATT reports, we'll be able to get a more helpful picture of how states pursue and manage responsible arms transfers, but also of how global arms exports and imports are actually being utilized around the world. We still have significant work to do. I don't want to make light of the challenges to amending the reporting templates or sharing best practices, but I think there's a lot of positive steps that we can take. And the 3 issues which I mentioned that I personally have concerns about, the less than universal compliance of reporting, the increase in private reporting for both the initial and annual reports, and the sizable percentage of states that are withholding sensitive information, create obvious transparency challenges. But I believe that the ATT Monitor and all of us willing to work on this can really try to solve some of those challenges in the years to come. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Very interesting findings and remarks. And the key word seems to repeat, right? Transparency. So I think that's at the heart of not only the ATT, but also of the work that our institutions are doing these days. We want to be mindful of the transparency commitments of states parties. So we will start with some questions. I have one here, and I think it could be probably, to whomever wanna take this one. It's a question from the Parliamentary Forum on Small Arms and Light Weapons. And it says, given the conclusions from the ATT Monitor report and the current status of the ATT, what would be your main recommendations for parliamentarians? Anyone wants to take that?
I think the ATT Monitor annual reports, we do provide a lot of recommendations for states parties and for civil society and for further research and other things to look into for sure. And actually, I was going to default to Rachel, who I believe this is much more part of her wheelhouse for sure.
No, I mean, yes, you have lots of recommendations in the report itself. I would also, I think one of the key challenges is helping states develop their national processes. So this becomes a regular part of the annual process for the executive agencies, and parliamentarians can encourage that data to be made public, to develop processes and procedures, to identify sort of where the gaps may be. In some cases, it may be providing funding to develop systems, but developing those infrastructures and bureaucracies is really, I think, a key component to ensuring that every year that report is generated, that the deadlines are well known, and that states know what their responsibilities are.
Oh, I was muted. Thank you so much. I think I have a very specific question for Ambassador Mansfield. It says, you mentioned the importance of the gender criteria for Australia. Do you know of any example of a specific arms export license denied by Australia where the gender-based violence criteria was used as the reason for a denial?
Thanks, Karina, and whoever asked the question. The short answer is I don't actually know if there's a specific occasion when that has been the case. Australia domestically has very strong gun laws generally, and there's a recognition about power relationships and how weapons can sort of shift that. But it's a big concern for us too in terms of the impact of gun ownership in the Pacific and in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals. So I guess I pitch it more in terms of the underlying issues that can be gender specific as something that we're extremely conscious of in terms of our own domestic policies, but also in terms of the Pacific in particular. But I can see if I can find out if there is something more specific that would illustrate the answer to that question. So apologies, I can't go to the heart of it.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you anyways. I have another question. This is specifically addressed for Catherine. You said in your presentation that there wasn't a lot of time, of course, to highlight the recommendations related to the diversion chapter. And the chapter appears to highlight developments in post-shipment verification. And this person wonders if you could say a little bit more about how that fits into the counter-diversion through transparency and cooperation, which is also one of the lines that we took in the report and developing more in depth.
Absolutely. Yes, in the diversion chapter, we highlight the German and Swiss post-shipment verification systems specifically, and we do so as highlighting essentially good practice after detecting cases of diversion. So when thinking about PSV systems as being specific to countering diversion through transparency and cooperation, the systems inherently require cooperation and information sharing between exporting and importing states so that documentation can be checked. They can do on-site visits, they can conduct inventory checks, investigate suspected violations of transfer conditions, and so on. So by creating these systems and participating in them, you are inherently participating in a system that is more transparent. And that is something we highlight definitely as good practice.
Okay, thank you very much. I have, I think, two related questions here, and probably any of the panelists or the ambassadors can also jump in to answer. So global arms exports have increased quite significantly in the last couple of years, right, since the ATT was agreed. And this is even more the case in conflict-ridden regions such as the Middle East. Between them, Russia and the US, which are outside of the treaty, they account for more than 50% of global arms exports. And the arms, of course, continue flooding into conflict zones such as Yemen, Libya, etc. It is not the case that the ATT has been largely irrelevant to both trends in the arms market and actual export licensing decisions, including to serious places where breaches of international humanitarian law have been recorded. Does anyone want to take that one? Yeah, Ambassador. You are
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Hello. Well, you know, it's a matter of perspective. Sometimes when we develop international law, we have to think that for many, many centuries, international law was developed only regarding the interests of states, among states and between states. So whatever was behind and under the competence of the free will of states at that time was not something that the international community addressed as obligations. And so, of course, ideally, it would be great that a treaty of this kind, which is unprecedented, could be so effective as to change the pattern of the diversion in 6 or 7 years. But if we put it in comparison to the development of many treaties and the implementation of many international law at large, it's quite successful. Just to have 110 state parties in such a short time, to have important countries, of course, not all of them yet, but important countries that are part of the arms trade as part and state parties are with the obligations of reporting. So yes, we will very much like to be the ATT fully impacting on avoiding that illicit arms trade end up in the wrong hands, enhancing human suffering. But I'm optimistic, and I try to look at things in perspective, and I think we are moving forward, and we are going in the right direction in joint efforts like the Control Arms report and the state parties doing what we are doing. Yeah. So we all look for universalization, but we are in the right track.
Thank you, Ambassador. Yeah, Ambassador Mansfield.
Hi, thanks, Karina. Just pop in briefly on this one too. I mean, I agree that it's worrying when there are very big states that don't feel bound by the same constraints, I suppose, as those who've signed up do. But I don't think that is a reason to not keep doing what we're doing. I think the fact that this sets a standard and says there is best practice to aspire to, and then tries to track and measure how that improves is really important. So it's you know, the kind of the moral suasion, if you like, but that has to be backed up by evidence showing that it is actually making a difference. And that again is where the monitor is really important in terms of telling the story. So I don't think we should let perfection, i.e., you know, everybody signing up to it completely, get in the way of each country doing the best it can and continuing to put pressure on those that are not to improve. Thanks, Karina.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Anyone else? No? Okay, I have another question here that it's probably for all the panelists, but perhaps specifically for Ambassador Villegas, and it's a little bit outside the the scope of the ATT Monitor report per se, but it is in the context of the ATT in general. Can you share your thoughts on the possible challenges that the economic downturn caused by the COVID pandemic might have on the financial stability of the ATT and the possible remedies or mitigation measures? And the same goes for the ability of the Voluntary Trust Fund to keep providing assistance and supporting implementation efforts to the countries that are in need of those.
Yes, well, regarding that, we see many challenges, of course, in different areas of any treaty, and specifically on ATT, because it's a work in progress, the implementation of the treaty. As you know, we have several avenues of implementation that we are going through with different initiatives, proposals that, of course, we're ready to have a preparatory committee, we're ready to have working groups, discussions, engagement with civil society, and the pandemic and the COVID just exploded in the middle of that organization. So there are challenges, but on the budgetary issue itself and on the work and the possibility of capacity building and cooperation through the voluntary fund, I don't see personally a red light as a problem of looking forward for a new future, not having enough resources for ATT to work, or not having enough funds for the voluntary fund to help the states leverage in the participation. On the contrary, if you look at the CSP6, one of the decisions we took was precisely not to postpone and delay the conference for next year, and to have a conference this year, among other things, in order to approve the decisions that we need to approve in budgetary, for example, matters that we needed to do it. And so, on the contrary, I would say we have a conference, and a conference dealing with the budget and approving a budget that hopefully, in a different situation next year, will allow us to work properly. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. One question perhaps for Catherine and Rachel. How can annual reports be more comparative and compatible between importers and exporters countries? Because in several cases, they do not match. And this is something that perhaps it goes to previous analysis that we have done in the past, but if any of you can answer that.
Sure, I can start, but I think because we do work so closely with Rachel and the ATT Baseline Assessment Project, a lot of our recommendations are recommendations that we have adopted from the work they've done, which is very hands-on. It's been done over the course of years to make sure it's thorough and in touch with all different stakeholders related to reporting. So one recommendation we make in this year's report, which is something we also made in last year's report, is that given the fact that states parties are able to report different kinds of information, and this does contribute to comparing reports, it does contribute to making comparison across reports difficult. We do recommend that when states parties make decisions regarding reporting practice, they maintain stable over time. So we can make comparisons from year to year, which is also helpful. So that's one we suggest, and I can turn it over to Rachel for many others.
So we're short on time, so I could talk about this for a very long time, but there are some, I think, good suggestions of ways to amend the reporting templates in the annex to the working groups report. We also put out a report in January on potential adjustments to the reporting templates. I think we're not going to go back and change the treaty text. So states do have the option to provide information on authorizations or actual transfers. And as Catherine said, it's really important that states provide consistent information. So if you're going back and forth from year to year, one year you're giving authorizations, one year it's actuals, it's really hard to follow as some things could be authorized in one calendar year, but don't actually get exported until the following year. So being very clear what kinds of transfers, again, with, you know, value, quantity, those kinds of figures, so that it's consistent over time. It will, you know, because states have a lot of options, it will be very difficult to always do sort of that discrepancy analysis that Catherine mentioned. But if we do have some consistency, and if we identify some of those best practices that Catherine mentioned and that are listed in the monitor this year, that will get us a long way to having consistent information and comparable data.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm gonna combine a last question because we're running out of time. We don't want to keep you for too long, and it's very related to the findings that have been mentioned by all of you in the presentation today, which is this, you know, imbalance between the private reporting trends, which are increasing, and the, you know, the public reports submitted by state parties. There seems to be, you know, a very concerning increasing trend towards private reporting. So the question would be, what, and this is perhaps, you know, for all of you and especially the ambassadors, because they are more related to these issues, what would be the advice in light of this evidence for the next presidency? For the next presidency of the CSP7, what would be the advice for them, so that they can manage, or they can, in certain ways, work with states parties to change this trend, to change the trend of reporting privately, and to start increasingly reporting in a public manner, because at the end of the day, this is what transparency is about. So it's looking towards the future. You know, we're looking into next year's in Geneva, hopefully. Ambassador? Yeah.
Well, as chair, that question, I have to say something. But of course, every chair will have a challenge in this matter, because it's a matter of the scope of, it falls within the scope of sovereign states. I mean, we have to realize that we are talking about sovereign states, and this is international law and state parties. But we have witnessed for decades, probably since the UN started, how many issues that became advances for humankind. At the beginning, not everybody was convinced about it. And that is for disarmament, for human rights, for social issues, for so many things. So perhaps we are not there yet for all countries to feel comfortable with disclosing things that traditionally fell under the scope of a tradition of centuries of secrecy, of confidentiality. But the world was different also, and the relationships between the states were different. And so I think that the more we promote new instruments like this, the more people start looking at the implementation of the treaty and the tools that are not aimed at challenging sovereign state, but helping peace, stability, international security, and human rights. Well, the more we approach with that spirit, more and more countries will start rethinking some of their procedures and some of their way of publicizing their decisions and the different things that are involved in this trade. So I'm confident that at one point we might have more and more transparency in real terms, as we all want, of course.
Thank you, Ambassador. We look forward to that. Rachel, oh, sorry.
No, let the
Ambassador Gabriels, yeah.
No, I mean, sorry, I don't want to take the floor from Rachel, so be my
No,
guest.
please.
Just a few remarks in line with the president. I think it's not only a task for the chair, for the president, of course, for the incoming chair. It is important to enter a dialogue with countries, certainly when they change their policy, and what is the reasons behind it. But yeah, we should remember this is a very young treaty still, so it still has to improve itself, and it's for all of us to have a task in this. There was a question earlier about the role of parliamentarians, and of course parliamentarians in the national realm also can play a role in this sphere, but civil society, academia, and I think it's up to the states if they choose not to be transparent. Of course, it's against the spirit of the treaty, but they must have pretty good reasons to argue that this is the case. You cannot just say it's for national security reasons. It could be, but you should also be able to explain, and certainly when you have a change of policy, what is the reason? And for new states entering the treaty, I think there's certainly a role for all of us, but also for the president to make clear what is the essence of this treaty. And well, the monitor is certainly a tool to make it clear and to see where we are in reporting and in transparency, and to make it clear, as you did, and thank you for that, where are the shortcomings? And there are still quite some shortcomings, and they certainly have to improve. And I think this is a task for all of us to make sure that it certainly improved. But sorry, Rachel, I didn't want to take the floor before you.
Thank you, Ambassador.
I will always defer to you, Ambassador Galbraith. I just wanted to remind everyone that the treaty is written in such a way that public reporting is what is desirable. And I think there has been some confusion, and it's very clearly demonstrated in the reporting template suggested changes, that the default has been made private rather than public. And so that just needs to be switched. And in many cases, when pressed on why is a report private, the state has said, oh, that was a mistake. It wasn't supposed to be private. I don't think, though, there has been the outreach to states that report privately to try and determine why it is that they are reporting privately. And so I'm very pleased to tell you that a project we will be doing in the next couple months is to send a survey to states parties to follow up, to find out what have been the largest challenges to reporting, what processes would be easier for them. And certainly we'll be asking about, if you have reported privately, what is the reason for that? Is it just a misunderstanding of the box that you tick on the form? Is it a national security reason, as was mentioned? So my personal plea is to all of you states parties, when you receive that survey, to please fill it out so that we can best assist in answering questions like this, but also in providing our analysis of what kinds of things need to be changed within the treaty processes. This is a very young treaty, but there is also some worrying trends already that we would like to see not continue for the future. As with all treaties, those who were involved in the negotiations, maybe actually some of them have circled back around, to be honest, but many of those people have moved on to other posts. And so that institutional memory of, as the ambassador said, the essence of the treaty has been lost a little bit. And I think it's really important to remind everyone, if you read the treaty text, it is very clearly motivated by public reporting, by open discussion, by transparency in the global arms trade.
Thank you very much. We are pretty much with no time. Some questions will unfortunately be unanswered today. Hopefully we will take note of them, and in time we will try to reply to you. I just wanted to tell you one thing before giving Ambassador Sally Mansfield just the final chance to say a few closing words. This session has been, this webinar has been recorded, and it will be posted online later on the day on our ATT Monitor website, and also on the Control Arms website and our YouTube channel. So for those of you who either participated and entered later and joined later to the event, you will have the opportunity to see the full event completely recorded. So Sally, would you like to say a final words, and then?
Thanks, Karina. Yeah, very briefly, to thank all of you again for your commitment to doing this and to the work. The monitor itself, I think, is incredibly important, because that, more than anything, is what helps us tell the story. It's really important that governments, of course, give you the raw material, give you the data, which you then are able to analyse and pick up trends and challenge member states back to do better. But also to use the narrative in terms of what we hope will be improvements in the actual impact of implementing the treaty on our societies, because that, at the end of the day, is what really matters. And so the treaty itself, the way you report on it, the way we then pick up those stories and encourage our own governments, our own societies, our own businesses to do better, is what will actually have impact over time. So I think we all carry a responsibility to try and push for universalization. I know that within the Pacific region, it is still not anywhere near what we would like it to be. And so we also need to look at the burden of responsibility in terms of reporting and making it as straightforward as we can. But look, the analysis and the trends and so on that you've presented today, and thanks so much, my ambassadorial colleagues, thanks Rachel and Catherine, for all the work you're doing, because without this, then the actual raison d'etre of the ATT isn't as well known. And so just again to underline that incredible importance of the work that you're doing. Many thanks all round.
Thank you all. Thank you very, very much for this opportunity today. We wish Ambassador Villegas good luck with the rest of the week and the presidency of CSP6. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're a busy ambassador these days, and I'm very proud. I'm sorry, this is a personal note, because he's the ambassador from Argentina, my country. So it's very nice to have you today. Yes, I see. That was on Monday. It was one of our national days with General San Martin. Thank you. And thank you so much, Ambassador Mansfield, Ambassador Gabrielse, for the support for the ATT Monitor project. We really, really look forward to continue working with you. Thank you, Rachel, again, for your insights. And of course, Catherine, my colleague and friend. And we will see you very soon. Keep yourself updated on our website and on all this new material that I have presented you today. And good luck. Thank you. Bye-bye.